The man once celebrated as one of America's most powerful pastors now stands before the court admitting guilt. Robert Morris, the founder of Gateway Church, one of Texas's largest megachurches, has just pled guilty in a shocking turn of events that's sending ripples through the Christian community. But what really happened behind those massive church doors? What led one of the most influential religious leaders in the country from the pulpit to the courtroom? Stay tuned, because what we uncovered will change the way you see megachurch power forever. Robert Morris wasn't just any pastor. He was a brand, the face of Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas, one of the biggest and wealthiest megachurches in the United States. With over 30,000 members, a sprawling multi-campus empire, and millions tuning in online every week, Morris built his image on faith, influence, and family values. But all of that came crashing down when reports emerged that he had quietly pleaded guilty, a stunning admission from a man so many saw as untouchable. In this video, we're breaking down everything that led to this shocking fall from grace. From the rise of Gateway Church's massive influence to the disturbing details that led investigators straight to Robert Morris himself, and how his guilty plea is shaking the very foundation of megachurch culture in America. You won't believe how deep this story goes, from whispers inside the church walls to explosive reactions from former members and fellow pastors. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll see why this case is being called one of the most scandalous moments in modern church history. So grab your coffee, sit back, and stay with me, because this story isn't just about one man's sin. It's about power, money, loyalty, and what happens when the truth finally comes to light. Before the scandal, before the headlines, and long before any courtroom confession, Robert Morris was a name that commanded respect in Christian circles. To millions, he was a spiritual giant, a man whose teachings on generosity, leadership, and faith were broadcast in churches and living rooms across America. But like many powerful stories, his began small. Back in the year 2000, in the suburbs of Southlake, Texas, Robert Morris founded Gateway Church with just a handful of members meeting in a living room. It was humble, raw, and deeply spiritual, or so it seemed. Within just a few years, Gateway transformed from a small group into one of the most influential megachurches in the country. They built a massive worship center capable of holding thousands, complete with a full production team, professional lighting, cameras, and even a television network. Morris's messages were polished and persuasive. He spoke with authority, conviction, and charm, the kind of charisma that could make even skeptics pause and listen. He often preached about the power of tithing, claiming that giving back to God would unlock supernatural blessings. This became one of Gateway's core teachings and one of the reasons it grew so wealthy. Millions of dollars flowed through the church every year, and Robert Morris became not just a pastor, but a celebrity. He wrote best-selling books, appeared on major Christian networks, and rubbed shoulders with influential figures in politics and religion alike. Gateway's reach expanded beyond Texas, with branches opening across the nation and global live streams bringing in millions of viewers weekly. To many, Gateway was a symbol of modern Christian success, proof that the church could be both spiritual and influential in the modern world. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Former members began whispering about strict leadership structures, the pressure to give, and the growing sense that Gateway had become more of a business empire than a place of worship. And at the center of it all stood Robert Morris, the man whose charisma built the empire and whose personal life would soon put it all in jeopardy. Because while the world saw a confident pastor leading one of the largest congregations in America, few could imagine the secret battles and moral compromises unfolding behind the pulpit. And those secrets, they were about to explode into public view. To understand how Robert Morris rose so high and ultimately fell so hard, you have to look at the world he built around him. Gateway Church wasn't just a place of worship. It was a corporate machine disguised as a ministry, complete with its own media arm, publishing house, and tight-knit leadership circle that operated more like an executive board than a group of spiritual shepherds. At the center of this operation was Robert Morris, surrounded by a loyal group of insiders, trusted pastors, financial officers, and longtime friends who owed their positions, salaries, and influence directly to him. This inner circle controlled what the public saw, what members were told, and how the narrative around Gateway's success was shaped. From the outside, Gateway Church looked like the model of modern Christianity: state-of-the-art facilities, high-production worship experiences, and a message that combined biblical truth with a motivational twist. But behind closed doors, the environment was far more complex. Former staff members and ex-congregants began describing a culture of control where questioning leadership was discouraged, and loyalty to the pastor often mattered more than loyalty to the truth. Robert Morris often preached about submission and obedience, not just to God, but to church authority. On the surface, those seemed like spiritual principles, but many now see them as a way to silence dissent and keep the power structure intact. The higher Gateway climbed, the tighter that control became. Money, of course, was the lifeblood of the operation. Gateway's annual budget reportedly reached into the tens of millions, funded largely by the tithes and offerings of its massive congregation. Lavish facilities were built, staff were paid handsomely, and Morris's influence continued to spread through national conferences, book sales, and television broadcasts. It was a multi-million-dollar ecosystem built around the image of one man's divine calling. And that's where the problem began. Because when an entire organization revolves around a single figure, accountability fades. Those close to Morris rarely questioned his decisions. Even when rumors or concerns surfaced, they were often dismissed as attacks from the enemy. In other words, if you questioned Robert Morris, you were seen as questioning God's anointed. Over the years, reports began surfacing that Gateway had quietly dealt with internal controversies, staff disputes, financial questions, and even moral concerns, all handled internally and kept far from the public eye. Few knew the details, but insiders claimed that the church's leadership culture made transparency nearly impossible. Everything was about protecting the brand, and the brand was Robert Morris. His image was everything: polished, calm, and fatherly. He had a way of making even the most difficult topics sound safe. Even when his sermons touched on personal weakness or repentance, he presented himself as honest and open. But as time went on, it became clear that not everything was as it seemed. Behind the stage lights and perfectly timed sermons, rumors began to swirl. Rumors that certain incidents involving the pastor had been quietly buried. At first, they seemed unbelievable. How could a man so respected, so powerful, be hiding something so dark? But as more and more stories emerged, a disturbing pattern began to take shape. It wasn't just about leadership abuse or questionable finances anymore. There were whispers of personal misconduct, claims that for years had been brushed aside or covered up by those in his inner circle. And as investigators began to dig deeper, those whispers would soon turn into explosive revelations. Because while the public continued to see Gateway Church as a beacon of faith and stability, behind the scenes, the walls were beginning to crack. And when those cracks finally gave way, the truth about Robert Morris would shock not only his congregation, but the entire nation. The year the story broke will forever be remembered by Gateway Church members as the moment their world turned upside down. For over 2 decades, Robert Morris had been the face of spiritual success, the man whose sermons filled arenas and whose words shaped the faith of thousands. But when the allegations surfaced, everything changed. It began quietly: whispers online, cryptic social media posts, and statements from people who had once worked closely with Morris. At first, these claims seemed too outrageous to believe. The idea that the founder of one of Texas's largest and most respected megachurches could be accused of such serious wrongdoing was unthinkable. But as the days passed, the details became impossible to ignore. Multiple reports emerged describing deeply disturbing behavior that allegedly spanned years, behavior that, according to insiders, had been repeatedly covered up to protect Morris's image and the church's reputation.